Good morning. Have that it's time for us to start our Bible class session for this morning. Glad you're with us. We'll be in Leviticus chapter 3. That's where we'll pick up this morning, Leviticus 3. Before we begin there, let's go to God in prayer. Our God and Father in heaven, we are thankful for this day, for this time, Father, where we can come and open your word, study from it. Father, we look to you for the guidance and for the comfort, for the instruction you give through that word as we look at what you have revealed. We ask continued blessings from you on all those of this world, but especially on those afflicted by the virus. We ask your continued blessings on this country, that peace may come again, that we might be in friendship with each other, but as well as with you, most importantly. We're thankful for your Son who gives us that opportunity for salvation, and it's in his name that we pray. Amen. Leviticus chapter 3, we're going to introduce the peace offerings this morning. That's what Leviticus 3 will contain. We'll see some of the differences, and it'll take us a little bit to walk through that, but let's read the 17 verses, and then we'll come back and talk about them. Leviticus 3. And if his oblation be a sacrifice of peace offering, if he offer it of the herd, whether it be a male or female, he shall offer it without blemish before the Lord. And he shall lay his hand upon the head of his offering and kill it at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And Aaron's sons, the priests, shall sprinkle the blood upon the altar round about. And he shall offer of the sacrifice of the peace offering an offering made by fire unto the Lord, the fat that covereth the inwards, and all the fat that is upon the inwards, and the 2 kidneys, and the fat that is on them, which is by the flanks, and the caul above the liver with the kidneys, it shall he take away. And Aaron's sons shall burn it on the altar upon the burnt sacrifice, which is upon the wood that is on the fire. It is an offering made by fire of a sweet savor unto the Lord. And if his offering for a sacrifice of peace offering unto the Lord be of the flock, male or female, he shall offer it without blemish. If he offer a lamb for his offering, then shall he offer it before the Lord. And he shall lay his hand upon the head of his offering, and kill it before the tabernacle of the congregation. And Aaron's sons shall sprinkle the blood thereof round about upon the altar. And he shall offer of the sacrifice of the peace offering an offering made by fire unto the Lord. The fat thereof and the whole rump, it shall he take off hard by the backbone, and the fat that covereth the inwards, and all the fat that is upon the inwards, and the 2 kidneys, and the fat that is upon them, which is by the flanks, and the caul above the liver with the kidneys, it shall he take away. And the priest shall burn it upon the altar. It is the food of the offering made by fire unto the Lord. And if his offering be a goat, then he shall offer it before the Lord. And he shall lay his hand upon the head of it, and kill it before the tabernacle of the congregation. And the sons of Aaron shall sprinkle the blood thereof upon the altar round about. And he shall offer thereof his offering, even an offering made by fire unto the Lord, the fat that covereth the inwards, and all the fat that is upon the inwards, and the 2 kidneys, and the fat that is upon them, which is by the flanks, and the caul above the liver with the kidneys, it shall he take away. And the priest shall burn them upon the altar. It is the food of the offering made by fire for a sweet savor. All the fat is the Lord's. It shall be a perpetual statute for your generations throughout all your dwellings, that ye eat neither fat nor blood. And we'll add much in the comments from chapter 7, also dealing with this peace offering and some other passages, just to clarify what it is. But as we think about it, chapter 1 introduced the idea of the burnt offering, and the entire animal was burned. You then had the meat offering or meal offering in chapter 2, and it was burnt. And when we come to chapter 3, we start to see a difference. There are 3 types of animals here that one could offer in a peace offering. You could offer a bull, or a cow from one's herd, male or female, it says there in verse, excuse me, in verse 1. You could offer a male or a female from one's goat herd as you go down to verses 12 and following. Or you could offer a male or a female of the sheep as you go down to verses, where's that one at? That's in verse 7. Yeah, 7 and 8. You make these offerings. So you have 3 types of animals. And then when we get into chapter 7, it gives us 3 instances. In chapter 7, just to turn over there so that we get the picture of this, when you look at Leviticus and you think about how God is presenting it, he presents what the sacrifices are, then he comes back with further explanation later. And so looking for a moment as we think about it, at the actual offering, you had the bull or the cow, you have the ram or the sheep, you have the male or the female goat. Those are your 3 types of animals. 3 reasons or specific times you might offer this. You go over to chapter 7 and it begins about verse 11. But verse 11 and 12, and this is the law of the sacrifice of peace offerings, which he shall offer unto the Lord. And so as you begin to look at the peace offering, 3 specific reasons it could be offered. The first one is for a sprinkling of thanksgiving, an offering of thanksgiving. Verses 12 through 15 here of chapter 7. If he offer it for a thanksgiving, then he shall offer with the sacrifice of thanksgiving unleavened cakes mingled with oil, and unleavened wafers anointed with oil, and cakes mingled with oil, and fine flour fried. And so we see the idea of thanksgiving. I have gotten much from the Lord, so I'm giving some back to the Lord. And so we see the idea behind the first one. A second reason one might offer a peace offering. You go down on to verses 16 and following here in chapter 7. Verse 16, but if the sacrifice of his offering be a vow or a voluntary offering, it shall be eaten the same day that he offereth the sacrifice. And so it is in answer to a vow. When you made a vow, you put some value around it. In this case, I've completed the vow, or I'm making the vow, and I'm going to make an offering to God with it. Or simply because one wants to make an offering. In all 3 cases, what sets the peace offering so far apart from the others, you made a burnt offering in response to something. You made a meal offering in response to something. The peace offering is a totally voluntary, free will act. I'm thankful, I made a vow, or I just want to make an offering to God. And in this case, the entire animal, as we notice, was not burnt. When we look at it, God gave specific description back in chapter 3 now. As we think about the bull first, the bull or the cow, we notice the ritual again. And looking at that, you bring the offering, the bull, the cow, the sheep, the ram, the goat, whichever one it is, you lay your hands upon it. That's in verse 2 for the bull or cow. And if you go to verse 8 for the sheep or the ram, and you go to verse 13 for the goats, male or female, you lay your hand on it. You notice, again, the one making the sacrifice, the offerer in this case, is still involved in this worship. This is not, again, something as many have thought that you walk up to the tabernacle, you drop off and say, I'm making a peace offering to God, and you walk away. No, you have to lay your hands on the animal. You notice that it's you that kills it. Look at verses 1 and 2 again. thinking about the bull or the cow. And if his oblation be a sacrifice of peace offering, if he offer it of the herd, whether it be a male or a female, he shall offer it without blemish before the Lord. And he shall lay his hand upon the head of his offering and kill it at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. All of that is the person making the sacrifice. When does the priest get involved? Well, notice at the end of verse 2, and Aaron's sons, the priest, shall sprinkle the blood upon the altar round about. And so we see that picture again. We make an offering. The one making the offering is involved in this a whole process. It's not something left out. Thinking a little bit more then about why you would lay your hands on it and the blood itself. If this is just a peace offering, why is all of that important? Well, the translation of peace offering allows for some flexibility in those meanings and purposes that we looked at. Others have translated it just to give the idea of the words behind it in the Hebrew as being a well-being offering. Because I am well off or well-being, or others have done it as a fellowship or a communion offering, depending on where you're reading it. And so we get this whole idea. The peace offering is that kind of offering, but it's my peace, and so I'm laying my hands on that animal, just like you did for the burnt offering. You still do it. Why is the blood taken care of? Well, the blood is what contains the life. So there is an atoning that's made even in this offering. While it is not a like the sin and the guilt and the burnt offerings are for a specific reason, the blood still pays some price. There's still some atonement associated with that, as we'll see throughout this picture. And so you have that peace. Giving some insight to it, a man named Gordon Wyndham, in a commentary he wrote, he gives some insight into why the peace offering was voluntary. Here's what he says. The traditional rendering peace offering connects shalemim with Hebrew shalom, peace. Peace in Hebrew means more than the absence of war. True peace means health, prosperity, and peace with God, i.e., salvation. So the person bringing this peace offering, or even if it was because of a vow they've made to God, or even just because they want to, it's because they have that understanding of what they've gotten from God, that salvation that comes, that peace that they can have. This begins to explain, if we look into the New Testament and some of the songs that we sing, and we talk about the peace that passes understanding. Here it is, understanding no matter what is it going on in the world, God has given me salvation. Now, all too often, and even in this, some get that picture from the offering being made that it's only because you're well off. And there's a point to make. When we looked at the burnt offering, think about how this becomes different. In the burnt offering, one could come back in chapter 1 and have it be of the herd, so a bull, because it's a male without blemish, or it could be a sheep without blemish, or it could be a goat without blemish, or if you didn't have any of those, you could bring pigeons or turtle doves. Notice that the peace offering doesn't have that allocation for that. You have the bull or the cow, you have the sheep or the ram, you have the goat, male or female, but you don't have any birds. There can be multiple reasons for this. Number one, yes, it did involve the idea of having health and prosperity. If you're not rich enough to have one of those animals, then you didn't bring a peace offering. The other is because, as we begin to look at it, notice what's burnt here, and then we'll talk about what happens to what's left here in just a moment. Staying at verse 3 and following with just the bull or the cow for a moment. And he shall offer of the sacrifice of the peace offering an offering made by fire unto the Lord. So now the peace offering that was that entire bull or cow is being divided into another offering, it says. You're going to take of that bull or that cow, it says, and make an offering by fire unto the Lord. The fat that covereth the inwards and all the fat that is upon the inwards. So the fatty tissue will be offered, and the 2 kidneys and the fat that is on them, which is by the flanks, and the caul above the liver with the kidneys, it shall he take away. So that part of the animal's going to be burnt, it says, verse 5, and Aaron's son shall burn it on the altar. Well, what happens to the rest of it? What happens to the rest of this animal? Well, turn over back to chapter 7 for a moment. And we'll cover it again when we get into chapter 7. But chapter 7 gives us some of this that makes this offering quite different. Notice beginning in verse 11 again. And this is the law of the sacrifice of peace offerings. So we're talking about the same offering. We get the offering details spelled out in chapter 3. Now we get the whole purpose and the picture of how it's done in chapter 7. You're going to make this peace offering. 12. If he offer it for a thanksgiving, then he shall offer with the sacrifice of thanksgiving unleavened cakes mingled with oil, and unleavened wafers anointed with oil, and cakes mingled with oil of fine flour fried. Besides the cakes, he shall offer for his offering leavened bread of the sacrifice of thanksgiving of his peace offerings. Now, there's something that's not spelled out back in chapter 3, but notice what's added. You have to have unleavened cakes of different kinds, and even a leavened loaf of bread it gives here. You're basically going to make a feast. Think of this. Look how it goes on. Verse 14, and of it he shall offer one out of the whole oblation for a heave offering unto the Lord, and it shall be the priests that sprinkle the blood of the peace offerings. So now you're going to bring some of this bread. You've killed this animal. The priest has taken the blood, sprinkled it about the altar, and the priest gets some of that bread. It says here, offer one out of the whole oblation for a heave offering. The priest gets that. Verse 15, and the flesh of the sacrifice of his peace offerings for thanksgiving shall be eaten the same day that is offered. He shall not leave any of it until morning. Well, what happened to what wasn't burnt? Now you begin to get the picture. The peace offering is more of what we would call a feast. You bring the bull or the cow or the sheep or the ram or the goat down to the tabernacle. You kill it. There's a set part of it that is taken and burnt. There's a part of it that's given to the priest, and then you take the rest and you're allowed to take it home, cook it, and have a meal. Now you got to eat it that day. You can't kill the cow and put it in the freezer for a month. You have to use it that day, God says. And you have to have the bread with it. Look at verse 16. You get this same picture. But if the sacrifice, this peace offering again, be a vow or a voluntary offering, it shall be eaten the same day that he offereth their sacrifice. And on the morrow also the remainder of it shall be eaten. Now notice the difference here depending on your one purpose. You could have the peace offering that comes. I make the sacrifice. I take it home. I can cook it and eat it. You can't leave any of it. If it is for the true peace offering, the one of thanksgiving. If it's the one that is for a vow or for a voluntary reason, I just want to make an offering to the Lord, in other words, then I eat it the same day, it says, and on the morrow. So I can have the leftovers for the next day at this point. But the remainder of the flesh, verse 17, of the sacrifice on the third day shall be burnt with fire. Anything that's left after that has to be burnt. And so we get a picture. Now, it has to be done a certain way and at certain times, or it's an abomination. Look at verse 18. Again, you get details of how the animal's handled in chapter 3, details of the entire of the sacrifice here in chapter 7. And if any of the flesh of the sacrifice of his peace offerings be eaten at all on the third day, it shall not be accepted, neither shall it be imputed unto him that offereth it. It shall be an abomination, and the soul that eateth of it shall bear his iniquity. Notice you can take something And think about this in modern religion. We have an example here. You could have something and you've done it exactly right. You brought a male goat without blemish down to the tabernacle. You killed it. The blood was sprinkled about. The innards were stripped of the fat. The kidneys and all were burnt on the fire. You gave the priest his portion. You took the rest home. You had the cakes and the loaf of bread with it. You're ready to have a feast. You eat it that first evening. You eat it that second. There's still plenty left over. But if you eat of it, even though it was perfect and exactly right so far, on the third day, if you eat of it, it becomes an abomination. Think how many people might be doing so much exactly right according to the Bible and what God says, and yet they do one little thing. Here it is. There was just so much left, God. There's no way you want me to just waste it. What does God say? Look at verse 18 of chapter 7 again. Think of it with chapter 3. And if any of the flesh of the sacrifice of his peace offerings be eaten at all on the third day. It doesn't say you could make goat salad. I don't know what they call that. Chicken, we know what chicken salad is. It doesn't say you can make goat salad to have on the third day. If there's anything left on the third day, it's to be burnt, verse 17. Verse 18 says, if you don't follow that, it doesn't matter if half the animal's left. If you don't follow that, it's an abomination. And so we have this picture of what should be done and how it should be done and when it should be done. And so we see what's given. Looking as you go along and explaining it a little deeper. As the peace offering is made, one other difference comes up. It has to do with the blemish. When you think about this, now, all the other offerings say the same thing and are treated exactly the same. You shall offer without blemish. The burnt offering, it's a male of the herd, a male of the goats, or male of the sheep offered, and he has to be without blemish. That animal has to be perfect or complete. He can't be maimed or anything. When you look at the meal offering, you see the same thing with the kind of meal that is brought. When you get to the peace offering, it has to be without blemish, it says in chapter 3. Chapter 7 talked about it. But to show how God built on it and then gave one small little exception, turn to Leviticus chapter 22. Leviticus chapter 22. And you notice God hardly ever gives the exception up front. God lays down the base of the sacrifice, chapter 3. It's going to be a male or a female. It can be of the herd, so it can be a cow or a bull. It can be of the goats, male or female. It can be of the sheep, ram or a sheep. That's the base. It has to be without blemish. That's the absolute base. He goes into chapter 7. He stays with that base. It's an animal without blemish. It can be eaten on this day if it's for this. It can be eaten on this day and this day if it's this other one. Third day, it all has to be destroyed. That's the base. We get into Leviticus chapter 22 and down at verses 21 through 23. And this is talking of sacrifices of blemished animals. Notice what it says here, beginning at verse 21. And whosoever offereth the sacrifice of peace offerings unto the Lord to accomplish his vow, or a freewill offering in beeves or sheep, it shall be perfect to be accepted. There shall be no blemish therein. Blind or broken or maimed or having a wen or scurvy or scabbed, ye shall not offer these unto the Lord, nor make an offering by fire of them upon the altar unto the Lord. Either a bullock or a lamb that hath anything superfluous or lacking in his parts, that mayest thou offer for a freewill offering, but for a vow it shall not be accepted. Oh, notice God gives an exception for one specific, and not even for the whole peace offering. Think about that. One specific reason in the peace offering. Because notice, if you're giving it as thanksgiving or as a vow, then it has to be what? No blemish. But a bullock in verse 23, either a bullock or a lamb that hath any superfluous or lacking in his parts. In other words, maybe one leg is short. you can offer that animal as a free will offering. So notice God goes through all the bases first. Unfortunately, and the reason to bring this up and show that it's here on this peace offering, how do men usually want to do these types of things? Well, I tell you what, God, I'll give you whatever. I don't want what's left over. Yeah, I've got a herd of cows out there. I know. 4 of them are, man, they are just the best cows you've ever seen. I got one. It's a little runty and it has some scurvy or some mange or it's missing a leg, but that's all right. I can offer that to you, can't I, God? That's not how God does it. God starts with the base of it and says, in this one case, because you just want to make an offering to God, you can give one that's maybe got a leg that's too short. Notice it still can't have any major blemish. It can't have health issues. It can't have any of that. It has to be very superfluous, it says, something that really doesn't matter. That's where God gives the one exception. Unfortunately, man usually wants to have the exception be the rule. You think about this as worship, and we think about it looking into the future. Can one making an offering come before God and not be perfect? And we're not talking physically at all in this case, because we know in the New Testament it becomes spiritual. Can one come before God who's not perfect? Think about how men have treated the idea of marriage, divorce, and remarriage. What does that do to a soul that comes before God but make it maimed or disfigured or not perfect? How can that be given as an offering? And so you see this same picture going to be carried forward in so many different ways, but God does allow that one little piece. And so that's about where we're going to close. We're almost out of time this morning, and there's no need for us to try to dive deeper into it, but we see the peace offering that's been made before God. Join us again for worship here in just a few minutes at 10:30. Thank you.